Fred Trump, the patriarch of one of New York's most powerful real estate empires, passed away on June 25, 1999, at the age of 93 in Long Island Medical Center. His death sent shockwaves through his family, with his children quickly diving into the details of his will and his vast property portfolio. But what seemed like a routine matter soon escalated into a full-fledged family drama. In the days following Fred's death, a bitter dispute erupted. Fred's grandchildren, the children of his eldest son Freddie, were conspicuously left out of the will. They believed that their grandfather's will had been altered under undue influence and soon filed a lawsuit against their aunt Mary Ann Trump and their uncles Robert and Donald Trump, alleging that the changes had been made during Fred's later years when his health was declining. The lawsuit set in motion a legal battle that would shape the future of the Trump family dynasty. The case revolved around accusations of manipulation and coercion as the family wrangled over what they believed to be their rightful share of the estate. The dispute not only raised questions about the true intentions behind Fred Trump's will, but also highlighted the complex dynamics within the Trump family, particularly when it came to Fred's children and their varying relationships with each other. While Fred's death was a somber occasion, the ensuing legal drama soon overshadowed it. The family's dirty laundry was aired in public, and the saga became part of the larger narrative of the Trump empire, which was founded by Fred and had been passed down to his son Donald. This clash over inheritance foreshadowed future tensions within the Trump family, with legal battles and power struggles becoming common themes in the family's ongoing legacy. Fred Trump, born on October 11, 1905, in the Bronx, New York, was the second child of Frederick and Elizabeth Trump. His full name at birth was Frederick Christ Trump, though he would be known simply as Fred throughout his life. His father, Frederick Trump, had emigrated from Germany in 1885 at the age of 16, seeking a better life in the United States during a time when German unification was underway and Europe was experiencing significant social and economic changes. Frederick Trump's early life in America was marked by hard work. He initially settled in Manhattan before moving out west to Seattle and later to the Yukon region in Canada during the Klondike Gold Rush in the late 1890s. His ventures in the hospitality industry, providing services for the gold prospectors, brought in substantial profits. By 1901, Frederick Trump returned to Germany, where he married Elizabeth Christ, a young woman from Bavaria. However, complications arose over his German citizenship, and due to the German authorities' concerns about his immigration status, the couple decided to return to New York. Fred Trump was born in New York in 1905, the second child of the couple, and was raised in a home that stood apart from many other immigrant families in the early 20th century. While most immigrant families lived in cramped tenements in neighborhoods like the Lower East Side, Fred's family was relatively well off. The Trumps moved into a new housing development in the South Bronx, where the apartments had bathrooms and ice boxes, considered luxuries for the time. Fred's childhood was not typical for a child of a European immigrant. His family enjoyed a standard of living that many immigrants could only dream of. His father, after returning to New York, started a real estate business in Queens, buying up properties and developing them. By the time Fred was a teenager, the family was firmly planted in the burgeoning real estate market of Queens, and it was here that Fred would learn the ropes of the industry that would later bring him massive success. By the time he was 18, Fred was working alongside his father, learning about real estate development firsthand. His father's influence was vital in shaping Fred's work ethic and understanding of the business. This foundation would prove essential as Fred, after the sudden death of his father in 1918, would take control of the family's real estate portfolio and begin to build it into the massive empire that would come to define the Trump name. After the death of his father in 1918, Fred Trump, still a teenager, found himself thrust into the responsibility of managing the family's growing real estate empire. Although his father's death was a tragic event, it also marked the beginning of Fred's journey to becoming a real estate mogul in his own right. At the time, his family had a modest collection of properties in Queens, which would serve as the foundation upon which Fred would build his fortune. Fred Trump's early years in business were anything but easy. He was just 19 years old when he took over the family business, and the economic landscape was anything but stable. The world was still reeling from the aftermath of World War I, and the United States was entering into a period of inflation and economic uncertainty. The country was also grappling with the effects of the Spanish flu pandemic, which had claimed the lives of millions worldwide, including Fred's father. Despite these challenges, Fred Trump was determined to keep the family business afloat. With limited capital and few resources, Fred started small, building modest homes for working-class families in Queens. He quickly learned the mechanics of construction and property development, starting with just 1 or 2 houses at a time. His strategy was simple: buy cheap land, build affordable homes, and sell them at a reasonable price to young, upwardly mobile families. His work ethic and dedication to building affordable homes paid off as the demand for housing in New York City began to grow. By the mid-1920s, Fred had developed entire blocks of homes in Queens. These homes were far from luxurious, but they offered solid, functional living spaces for middle-class families, many of whom were immigrants looking to start a new life in America. This emphasis on affordable, quality housing became Fred Trump's trademark and the cornerstone of his business success. In addition to his work in residential construction, Fred began to dabble in larger, commercial developments. He expanded his portfolio to include apartment buildings and rental properties, further solidifying his position in the New York real estate market. By the time the Great Depression hit in 1929, Fred Trump had already established a solid foundation for his business, which allowed him to weather the economic storm better than many of his competitors. Despite the financial challenges brought on by the Great Depression, Fred's ability to secure government-backed loans and take advantage of New Deal programs meant that he could continue his construction projects. The federal government's housing initiatives during this time provided crucial funding for builders like Fred, allowing him to continue developing properties even when private lenders were unwilling to extend credit. This was a turning point for Fred, as it enabled him to expand his operations at a time when most others were forced to scale back. By the 1930s, Fred Trump had transformed from a small-time builder into one of New York's leading real estate developers. His empire had expanded, and his influence within the city's real estate industry was growing. He was on the path to becoming a household name, though, at this point, his success was still largely confined to New York's outer boroughs, particularly Queens and Brooklyn. As Fred Trump's real estate empire continued to expand through the 1930s, his reputation within the industry grew, largely due to his ability to weather economic storms and his understanding of the opportunities presented by government-backed housing programs. His success during the Great Depression was largely attributed to his strategic use of federal initiatives that supported the construction of affordable housing. The New Deal, implemented by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1930s, was a key turning point for Fred. The government's initiatives to combat the economic crisis included providing loans and funding for housing projects. Fred Trump took full advantage of these programs, constructing thousands of affordable homes for working-class families. His most significant achievement during this period was the development of massive apartment complexes and housing units, many of which were located in Queens and Brooklyn, areas that were undergoing significant growth and gentrification. By the mid-1930s, Fred Trump's developments were not only about providing affordable homes, but also about shaping the very fabric of New York's rapidly expanding suburban landscape. As the population of the outer boroughs grew, Fred's properties provided the homes that many middle-class families sought, helping them escape the overcrowded tenements of Manhattan. His affordable housing units became essential for New Yorkers who were looking to start families and establish roots in the city. During this period, Fred was also acquiring more land, including properties in Brooklyn and other boroughs, further increasing his reach. His investments were not just limited to residential properties. Fred also saw the potential in commercial developments, including retail spaces and apartment buildings that would house the growing number of people in New York. By strategically purchasing land and expanding his properties, Fred was positioning himself as a major player in the city's real estate market. Fred's success in real estate was not without controversy. However, his reputation as a tough, no-nonsense businessman began to solidify during the 1940s. While he provided much-needed housing for working-class families, there were reports of his sometimes abrasive tactics as a landlord. He was known to be extremely focused on profit, sometimes at the expense of tenant satisfaction. Allegations of discriminatory practices in his rental properties surfaced, and some of his buildings faced poor living conditions, leading to legal disputes with tenants. Despite these challenges, Fred Trump's real estate business continued to thrive. He became one of the wealthiest and most influential figures in New York's real estate industry, largely due to his ability to navigate the political and economic landscapes of the time. His success was not merely the result of his business acumen, but also due to his ability to leverage government programs and capital to finance his projects, thus ensuring that his developments continued to grow, even during times of economic hardship. Fred Trump's influence also extended beyond real estate. He was known for his philanthropic efforts, particularly in supporting Jewish causes and charities. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, Fred made significant contributions to Jewish American institutions and political causes. He was an early supporter of Israel, purchasing bonds to aid in the establishment of the state. His generosity extended to various other causes, including funding hospitals and medical centers. As Fred's business empire grew, so did the complexity of his personal life and family dynamics. By the late 1940s, Fred had passed the reins of his real estate empire to his children, but his direct involvement in the day-to-day operations continued well into the 1970s. However, as the 1960s and 1970s ushered in a new era of change in the business world, Fred's role as the patriarch of the Trump family began to shift. His son Donald, having joined the family business in the late 1960s, was beginning to take a more prominent role, and Fred started preparing him to lead the empire. By the late 1960s, Fred Trump's empire was firmly established, and his son Donald was becoming more involved in the family business. Donald's entrance into the Trump organization marked the beginning of a new era for the company, one that would see it grow from a local, New York-based real estate business into a global brand. Fred, who had built his fortune on the back of affordable housing, now faced a changing landscape in the business world. Donald Trump, however, was a man of different aspirations. Unlike his father, who preferred to remain out of the public eye and focused on expanding the family's holdings in Queens and Brooklyn, Donald was eager to make a name for himself in the high-stakes world of Manhattan real estate. While Fred had always focused on residential developments for middle-class families, Donald's ambitions reached far beyond that. He set his sights on building large-scale commercial projects, luxury skyscrapers, and landmarks that would establish the Trump name as synonymous with opulence and success. Fred, who had spent decades building his empire quietly and steadily, was initially hesitant to allow Donald to take the reins completely. The relationship between father and son was complicated. On one hand, Fred was proud of his son's ambitions, but on the other, he was cautious and reluctant to part with the control that had brought him so much success. Fred had always been a hands-on manager, and he found it difficult to loosen his grip on the family business. Nevertheless, as the 1970s progressed, Fred began to hand more responsibility over to Donald. In 1971, Fred made the decision to promote Donald to president of the Trump Organization, though he remained involved in many of the company's major decisions. This was a gradual transition, with Fred taking a backseat role in the company's day-to-day operations, while Donald took on a more prominent role in the company's expansion. Donald's first major project in Manhattan was a redevelopment of the Commodore Hotel in 1976, using a $70 million loan, half of which was guaranteed by Fred. Donald transformed the hotel into the Grand Hyatt, marking his first big success in the Manhattan market. This project laid the groundwork for what would become the Trump family's biggest projects to date, including the construction of Trump Tower in the early 1980s. While Fred was still alive to witness his son's rising success, their differing approaches to business became increasingly evident. Fred was known for his careful, conservative approach to real estate, building properties that were functional but modest. Donald, however, was eager to make a bold statement. He sought out deals that would push the limits of what was possible, both in terms of construction and branding. Trump Tower, completed in 1983, was his first major attempt to create a lasting monument to his name. The 58-story skyscraper on Fifth Avenue became a symbol of luxury, attracting wealthy tenants and high-end retailers, further solidifying Donald's reputation as a real estate mogul. Fred Trump, despite his reluctance to embrace the flashy side of the business, could not ignore the success his son was achieving. He saw in Donald a drive and determination that mirrored his own, and as much as he may have been resistant to change, Fred knew that the family business was in capable hands. By the 1980s, the Trump Organization had become a family business in name, but Donald was increasingly the face of the company. As Fred grew older, his health began to decline, and he eventually stepped away from the daily operations of the business. In his later years, Fred's role became more symbolic as he passed the baton to his son, who was now the public figure at the helm of the Trump brand. As Donald Trump took the reins of the Trump organization, the company's trajectory shifted dramatically. While Fred had built his empire through relatively low-profile, mid-range developments that catered to the middle class, Donald's strategy was far more ambitious and attention-grabbing. He set his sights on the glittering skyline of Manhattan, where the stakes were higher and the projects far more visible. One of Donald's most iconic projects was the construction of Trump Tower in 1979. This 58-story skyscraper on Fifth Avenue became an instant symbol of luxury and power. The building was a departure from Fred's earlier projects, as it was designed not just as a functional office space, but as a luxury landmark. With its gold-plated atrium and high-end retail stores, Trump Tower embodied Donald's vision of real estate as both an investment and a brand. The completion of Trump Tower in 1983 marked a turning point in the Trump family's business. It catapulted Donald into the limelight and established him as a prominent figure in the New York real estate scene. However, the success of the project didn't come without its share of challenges. Donald's aggressive approach to business, coupled with his larger-than-life persona, often led to friction with the city's political and business elite. But despite the controversies, Donald Trump's star continued to rise. Fred, while still alive during these years, was not fully involved in the day-to-day management of the business. His health had begun to deteriorate, and his role within the company had become more symbolic. However, Fred remained a key figure in the background, offering advice and maintaining control over the family's assets. His influence was still felt, particularly when it came to decisions about the Trump organization's future direction. Though Fred had built a successful real estate empire, it was Donald's vision that would expand the family business into new territories. Despite their different approaches to business, Fred and Donald shared a common goal: to build wealth and secure the future of the Trump family for generations to come. Fred's success had been grounded in his ability to navigate the complex and often unpredictable world of real estate. Donald, on the other hand, sought to turn the Trump name into a global brand, associating it with wealth, power, and luxury. However, with growth came controversy. Donald's aggressive business tactics, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, sparked criticism. His decision to enter the casino business in Atlantic City, for example, was a particularly contentious one. In the late 1980s, Donald acquired several casinos in Atlantic City, including the Trump Taj Mahal, Trump Plaza, and Trump Castle. While these projects were initially seen as a way to diversify the family business, they ultimately proved to be disastrous for Donald's financial health. By the early 1990s, the casino ventures were in financial trouble, with Donald facing significant debt. The economic downturn of the early 1990s further exacerbated the situation, and Donald found himself struggling to keep his empire afloat. This period marked one of the most difficult times in the Trump organization's history. However, Fred Trump, despite his advanced age, played a crucial role in helping his son weather the storm. In an attempt to keep Donald from going under, Fred stepped in and offered his financial support. He did this in a way that was unconventional, by purchasing chips at one of his son's casinos. This allowed Fred to essentially lend money to Donald without triggering tax liabilities, though it also sparked a legal dispute with the Casino Control Commission, which fined Donald for the transaction. Fred's health continued to decline throughout the 1990s, and by 1999, the patriarch of the Trump family had passed away. His death marked the end of an era for the family business. While Donald had already become the public face of the Trump organization, Fred's passing left a significant void. Despite this, the wealth Fred had accumulated, much of it tied up in real estate holdings, ensured that the Trump family's financial future was secure. Fred Trump's legacy as a real estate developer was undeniable, but it was his son, Donald, who would take the Trump organization to new heights. The tensions between father and son, their differing business philosophies, and the controversies surrounding their respective careers would come to define the Trump family for decades to come. By the time Fred Trump passed away in 1999, his health had been in steady decline for several years. Diagnosed with dementia and suffering from a variety of age-related ailments, Fred's ability to manage the vast empire he had built became increasingly limited. As Fred's health deteriorated, the family began preparing for a transition of leadership in the Trump organization, with Donald positioned to take full control. However, what seemed like a smooth succession soon became complicated by legal battles over Fred's will. Fred Trump had made his intentions clear in his will. His children, including Donald, Marianne, Robert, and Freddie, were each to inherit a substantial portion of his estate. However, the will did not include his grandchildren, particularly Fred's eldest son, Freddie's children, Fred III and Mary Trump. This omission became a central issue in the ensuing battle over Fred's estate. Fred III and Mary, feeling they had been unfairly excluded, contested the will, arguing that their grandfather had been unduly influenced in his final years, and that his mental state had deteriorated to the point where he was no longer capable of making sound decisions. This legal dispute led to a lengthy and contentious court case, which was not only a battle over Fred's wealth, but also exposed the complex and often strained dynamics within the Trump family. The case centered around a codicil, or amendment, to Fred's original will, which allegedly reduced the inheritance of Freddie's children, Fred III and Mary. Their claim was that Donald had manipulated Fred during his declining health, using his position within the family to ensure that he would inherit the lion's share of the estate. The lawsuit was emblematic of the deep divisions within the Trump family. Fred III and Mary argued that their grandfather had been mentally incapacitated when the codicil was signed, and that Donald, along with his siblings, had taken advantage of his fragile state. The legal battle went on for several years, with both sides hiring prominent attorneys and engaging in a public war of words. The lawsuit, however, was eventually settled in part, though Fred III and Mary Trump would continue to claim that they were essentially disinherited. Despite the legal challenges, Fred Trump's death did not mark the end of his influence on the Trump organization. Donald, now fully in control of the company, continued to expand the family business into new areas, including entertainment, real estate development, and even television. As the years passed, Donald's persona as a brash, self-made billionaire took center stage, overshadowing his father's quiet and reserved approach to wealth building. Fred Trump's final years and the legal dispute over his will painted a stark contrast between the two men. Fred, who had spent his life carefully building a real estate empire with a conservative, no-nonsense approach, passed on his legacy to a son who would make headlines for his showmanship and willingness to take risks. The battle over Fred's estate reflected not just the financial interests at stake, but also the tensions between the traditional, grounded approach to wealth accumulation that Fred embodied and the larger-than-life, media-driven approach that Donald embraced. In the years that followed Fred Trump's death, his name and legacy would continue to be a source of intrigue and controversy, particularly as Donald Trump's political career unfolded. The scrutiny over Fred's wealth, the legal wrangling over his will, and the questions about the influence of his son Donald would only grow as the Trump family's story became intertwined with America's political landscape. Fred Trump's death in 1999 was a pivotal moment in both his family's history and the wider world's understanding of the Trump empire. While Fred had managed to keep much of his life out of the public eye, his passing brought his legacy into sharp focus, and the complex legal battles surrounding his will only added to the intrigue. As the years passed, it became clear that Fred's role as the patriarch of the Trump family had been far more instrumental than many had realized. Fred Trump had built a real estate empire from the ground up, often using creative financing, leveraging government loans, and capitalizing on New Deal programs to develop affordable housing in New York City. His success was a testament to his understanding of the market and his ability to navigate the political and economic climates of his time. However, he was also a man of mystery, preferring to stay out of the public eye and letting his business speak for itself. This sense of privacy and discretion only heightened the interest in his life after his death. Donald Trump, by contrast, was a far more public figure. While Fred had been content with his relatively low-profile yet successful real estate ventures, Donald sought to make a name for himself in the global spotlight. His entrance into the New York City real estate scene in the 1970s, particularly with the construction of Trump Tower, marked the beginning of a very different approach to business. Donald wasn't just building properties, he was building a brand. His brash, larger-than-life persona and his willingness to engage in media campaigns set him apart from his father's more reserved style. This distinction would come to define the Trump family for generations. Fred Trump's legacy, however, wasn't just about the buildings he left behind. It was about the foundation he created for future generations of his family. Despite the tensions and legal disputes over his estate, Fred's influence could still be felt in the way his children, particularly Donald, ran the Trump Organization. While Donald took the business to new heights with flashy projects and media exposure, the core of the Trump Organization remained grounded in Fred's principles of real estate development, taking calculated risks, understanding market demands, and most importantly, ensuring the family's financial security. In the early 2000s, as Donald Trump continued to expand his empire, the Trump brand grew to encompass not just real estate, but also entertainment, golf courses, and even a reality television show, The Apprentice. The show catapulted Donald to national fame, turning him into a household name and giving him the platform he needed to enter the political arena. However, as Donald's public persona grew, so did the scrutiny of his family's history, particularly Fred's. Fred's role in the development of the Trump Organization became a key topic of discussion, especially as Donald's business practices were increasingly questioned. The public's interest in the Trump family's background grew significantly, particularly when Donald decided to run for president in 2016. The scrutiny over Fred Trump's career and his role in building the family fortune became part of the narrative surrounding Donald's rise to power. Stories about Fred's past, including his alleged connections to the Ku Klux Klan and the controversial practices within his rental properties, resurfaced in the media, further complicating the family's image. Moreover, as investigations into Donald Trump's finances and business dealings continued to unfold, the question of Fred Trump's influence on his son's approach to business became more pertinent. Many observers noted that Fred's emphasis on controlling his empire and his sometimes harsh treatment of tenants was passed down to Donald, who adopted a similarly aggressive approach to business. The Trump family's reputation for cutting corners and using their political connections to further their interests became a recurring theme in the media and public discourse. Despite these controversies, Fred Trump's legacy remained a cornerstone of the Trump family empire. The wealth he built in his lifetime provided the foundation for his children, and Donald in particular, to build upon. However, as the family's wealth grew and the public's interest in their story intensified, the story of Fred Trump, the man who quietly built a real estate empire in New York, became intertwined with the public image of Donald Trump, the brash billionaire and 45th president of the United States. The debates over Fred's legacy, his methods, and the way he shaped the Trump family's fortune continued to swirl in the years following his death. For some, Fred's ability to build wealth during the Great Depression and his shrewd business practices were nothing short of impressive. For others, his controversial decisions and the way he built his empire cast a long shadow over his achievements. Regardless of the varying opinions about Fred's life and legacy, one thing was clear. Without Fred Trump, the Trump family would not have the immense wealth and influence it holds today.